Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
The assembly will come to order. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Assemblyman Asefa, Assemblywoman Backus, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, Assemblywoman Carlton, Assemblyman Carrillo, Assemblywoman Cohen, Assemblyman Daly, Assemblywoman Duran, Assemblyman Edwards, Assemblyman Ellison, Assemblyman Flores, Assemblyman Fumo, Assemblywoman Gorlow, Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblyman Hambrick, Assemblywoman Hanson, Assemblywoman Hardy, Assemblywoman Howdicke, Assemblyman Kramer, Assemblywoman Krasner, Assemblyman Levitt, Assemblywoman Martinez, Assemblyman McCurdy, Assemblywoman Miller, Assemblywoman Monroe Marino, Assemblywoman Monk, Assemblywoman Neal, Assemblywoman Nguyen, Assemblywoman Peters, Assemblyman Roberts, Assemblywoman Spiegel, Assemblyman Sprinkle, Assemblywoman Swank, Assemblyman Thompson, Assemblywoman Titus, Assemblywoman Tolles, Assemblywoman Torres, Assemblyman Watts, Assemblyman Wheeler, Assemblyman Yeager, Assemblyman Hambrick, Speaker Frierson.
Here, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May the record reflect that Mr. Hambrick is excused. There are 41 members present.
There are 41 members present, one excused. There is a quorum. The assembly will please rise for the prayer by Pastor Bruce Henderson of the Airport Road Church of Christ here in Carson City.
Let us pray. TYGIF. Thank you, God, it's Friday. There's just something about that day that offers rest and recuperation. Jesus came back from his last Friday, resurrected. May we come back refreshed and refocused and with trust in you to carry us through. In his name, amen.
Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance. Order of business 2, reading and approval of the journal.
Carson City, Thursday, February 14th.
Mr. Speaker.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to dispense with further reading of the journal and authorize the Speaker and Chief Clerk to make necessary corrections or additions.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We will now go to order of business 12, general file and third reading.
Senate Bill 143, introduced by Senators Atkinson et al., Assemblyman Frierson et al., an act relating to firearms, repealing, revising, and reenacting provisions relating to background checks for certain sales or transfers of firearms, prohibiting a fee from being charged for certain background checks, requiring a licensed dealer of firearms to conduct a background check before a private party sale or transfer in certain circumstances, providing penalty, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 10, end of Section 10, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 143 repeals, revises, and reenacts provisions relating to background checks on certain firearm sales and transfers that were approved by the voters at the 2016 general election. The measure provides that, with certain exceptions, a person who does not hold a license as a firearm dealer, importer, or manufacturer cannot sell or transfer a firearm to another unlicensed person unless a licensed dealer first conducts a background check on the buyer or transferee. The licensed dealer is to contact the same agency he or she would if selling or transferring the firearm from his or her inventory. Upon receiving a request for the background check, the Central Repository for the Nevada Records of Criminal History or other appropriate agency will conduct the background check in the same way it would for a sale or transfer from the licensed dealer's own inventory. The agency conducting the background check may not charge a fee for conducting the check. However, the licensed dealer may charge a reasonable fee for the background check and facilitating the sale or transfer. Finally, a person who sells or voluntarily transfers one or more firearms in violation of the provisions of this measure is guilty of a gross misdemeanor for the first offense and a Category C felony for a second or subsequent offense.
Any further remarks? Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, Nevada voters passed Question 1 because they wanted common sense changes to close loopholes in our background check system. When people obtain a firearm at a gun show or through another private transaction in Nevada, they should go through a background check just like any other person who gets one at a licensed gun store. I am a hunter and a responsible firearm owner. I've had a background check completed in just minutes. I know responsible gun owners in other states that have universal background checks, and their ability to keep and bear arms is alive and well. I think we all agree that there are some people who shouldn't have access to guns. Why then should they be able to go online or to a gun show and legally purchase a firearm without a background check? That is what this legislation addresses. With thousands already denied every year under our current system, I am confident that closing this loophole will reduce gun violence in our community. The will of the voters was not implemented, and that's why we are here today taking legislative action. This issue and even this policy is not new. This debate has been ongoing for years. A background checks bill was passed by our legislature in 2013. Then a ballot measure to expand background checks was qualified with hundreds of thousands of signatures and passed by Nevada voters in 2016. And in 2018, candidates from both sides of the aisle and all across Nevada, including me, were elected on campaign promises to take action on gun violence. A lot has happened since Question 1 was passed. Many more have died in mass shootings and other acts of gun violence. That is why more people than ever want to see those background check loopholes closed for good. Today, for example, marks 2 years and a day since the Parkland massacre. On that day, 14 students and 3 adults were murdered in cold blood. I would like to close my statement by reading the names of the Parkland shooting victims for the record. Alyssa Al-Hadef, Martin Anguiano, Jaime Gutenberg, Nicholas DeWarit, Luke Hoyer, Kara Lauren, Gina Montalto, Joaquin Oliver, Elena Petty, Meadow Pollock, Helena Ramsey, Alex Schachter, Carmen Shentrip, Peter Wang, Chris Hickson, Aaron Feiss, Scott Beagle. Today we have a chance to honor their memory. Today we have a chance to get something done to address gun violence. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on SB 143.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin, as many of my other colleagues have this week, by addressing the families and survivors of some of the mass tragedies we have seen over the last few years. As a police officer for over 34 years, I've all too often responded to horrific crime scenes and sat with families who had just learned their loved one won't be coming home. And Mr. Speaker, as we discuss this, my mind, along with so many others, goes back to October 1, 2017. I was working with Metro on that night, and I remember the sheer brutality of what happened. I remember the broken glass. I remember the deserted concert grounds littered with drop bags, cell phones, and concert paraphernalia. And I remember the parents and family members flying from all over the country, waiting for word that their child, their husband, their loved one was one of the lucky ones. Too often they weren't. Few in this chamber have seen the tragedy as closely as I have, and I would like to commend my colleague from District 41 for her bravery in discussing her own experiences this week. But the truth of the sad matter is that hundreds and hundreds of murders that I have worked in my career as a police officer, there are only a rare few that this legislation would have prevented, if any. Criminals are going to find their guns. Evildoers are going to find a way to commit acts designed to scare, and terrorists are still going to find ways to perpetrate terror. Nothing in this bill is truly enforceable. The Attorney General's office stated as much in an opinion issued soon after it was voted for in 2016. In fact, so similar is this legislation to the 2016 ballot initiative that I would question the need for us to have this vote today. We have to vote on this today because the language in the initiative was unenforceable to begin with and unlikely to survive legal challenges, as I believe this legislation will face the same struggle to stand up to legal challenges. What Nevada families deserve and what we must strive to give them is fairness, equality, and opportunity to fulfill their constitutional rights within the legal framework that keeps us all safe. And this legislation, written in New York, is not that. Words are hollow and meaningless. Words alone can't protect Nevada families, and words alone aren't going to keep guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. We must continue to invest in mental health professionals and continue to enforce and build upon our red flag laws and our law enforcement officers to a high standard that allows them to pick up on suspicious activity while allowing them to ensure that folks who shouldn't have access to weapons don't get access to weapons. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this important issue today, and I appreciate my colleagues for their civil debate this afternoon, almost afternoon. But I fear that this legislation is not going to accomplish anything other than provide hollow support to a political lobby. I urge opposition in Senate Bill 143. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And I'll urge members to remember our rules of decorum on the floor, one of which is not to refer to executive officers either by name or by office. We are limiting it to everybody to 3 minutes. We will move on to Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize in advance for my voice. I'll do the best I can to get through this in under 3 minutes as well. And I want to thank the chairs of Judiciary, Chair Canizaro and Chair Yeager, for doing an excellent job in the hearing on this issue, and to the other members of this body for civil discourse. I'd like to thank also everyone who came out to let their voices be heard, from the citizens who shared their concerns about their rights and the unintended consequences of this legislation, as well as the survivors who vulnerably and bravely shared their personal stories. I too have seen senseless acts of violence when I saw a family member of mine murdered and saw the evidence in court that I too will never ever be able to unsee. I understand the impacts of trauma, and it was not too long after that murder of my family member that we were also faced with another fearful situation of a serial rapist and murderer who was targeting women at the university where I teach. And in fact, one of the rapes happened right near where I parked my car every night after class. It was during that time that I decided to get my concealed weapons permit. I went through the classes, I got my background checks, I got my fingerprints, and did all the things a responsible gun owner would do. More recently, the first gun that I purchased was from my sister-in-law, who is a police officer, and it was at my dad's house. The second transfer of a firearm was from my father-in-law, who wanted to pass down his love of hunting by sharing with me his shotguns and his rifles. The way this law is written right now, those transactions would have resulted in a gross misdemeanor of up to a year in county jail, a fine of $1,000 or both, and any additional transfers would have resulted in a Category C felony, punishable by state imprisonment of up to 5 years and up to $10,000 in fines. I do believe in common sense regulations, and I do believe there is much we can do to enforce and enhance our background checks. I'm not opposed to fixing it or doing more in this area, but there are some flaws like these that I believe we could have had more time to address, and unfortunately, were not included in this final bill that we're voting on today. When it comes to gun violence, I don't believe that there is one person in this room who has not wept every time they see a new announcement of a new shooting. I too have wept deeply over this issue. And I do believe that there are many things that we can do to strengthen and enforce the laws that we have in place. I'd like to thank Governor Sisolak, particularly, for adopting the recommendations of the School Safety Task Force.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Assemblywoman Benitez-Thompson.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder to body members that it's unparliamentary and inconsistent with the independence of the legislative body to refer to the executive office by name.
Thank you. I apologize.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. As well, members on the floor by name.
Thank you. I apologize. Didn't even catch that. Thank you for that. But I am grateful that we have many opportunities ahead during this session to address this issue from many different angles, including looking at the recommendations of the School Safety Task Force, including adding new mental health provisions that I myself adamantly support. And I also would like to thank our federal government. Can I do that?
3 minutes, Assemblywoman.
Thank you. For additional motions to address this issue. I look forward to these continued discussions, but unfortunately, as it's written today, I cannot support this bill.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of SB143. I represent the 24th District, which encompasses much of the Reno metro area. I rise in support as not just a legislator, but as a parent to say enough is enough. I have 3 kids, and I shouldn't be packing bulletproof vests for them to go to school. Shootings are a tragic occurrence no matter where they happen, especially when they happen on school campuses and involve children. Our state is sadly not immune to these occurrences. In 2013, a 12-year-old student in 7th grade used a semi-automatic handgun at Sparks Middle School where he opened fired. In the end, 2 people were injured and 2 others were killed, including a teacher and the child's shooter. And what about Pine Middle School in Reno where 2 children were shot? Those are the ones that made the headlines, but they are daily tragedies that never make the news. In fact, every 20 hours a Nevadan dies at the hands of a gun. People like 37-year-old Daniela Rosada in Las Vegas, who was shot in the head last year by her ex-boyfriend over a custody battle of their 4-year-old daughter, Angie. Shootings like these occur far too often. They remind us that our fight to protect victims of domestic violence, teachers, children, and communities is far from over. It's time to find solutions and put an end to gun violence. Ladies and gentlemen, we owe it to our citizens to find solutions. They are counting on us. Requiring background checks for gun sales in Nevada is a major step towards reining in gun violence in our state. Law-abiding Nevadans, such as my husband, who is a concealed carry permit holder, won't be impacted by this act. The only people it inconveniences will be prohibited purchasers who shouldn't have access to firearms in the first place. There is no reason why we should ever allow violent criminals to get their hands on guns. And that is why I urge my colleagues to vote yes on SB 143. Thank you.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to share my gratitude for the passion of all my colleagues on this issue. As many of you know, my family's been here in Nevada for 5 generations, and we have a long heritage of parents, grandparents, and other family members passing down firearms to their grandchildren, cousins, in-laws, sharing and transferring firearms for the use of personal protection, hunting, and sport. This is part of our culture. It's part of who we are. It's how we were raised. I appreciate those who have made exceptions in this legislation, but I also believe that there was a way to promote common sense legislation that would have been bipartisan and would have allowed us not only to have a conversation with each other, but with the state of Nevada about this bill and its effects. That did not happen over the last few days. In my opinion, that's to the detriment of this chamber and to the state of Nevada as a whole. Since word got out on this legislation, that this legislation would come forth, I've received hundreds of emails, phone calls, and other correspondence from genuinely concerned Nevadans pleading with me to protect their Second Amendment rights. On the contrary, I've only received a handful of people that have asked me to push through this legislation that seeks to deter law-abiding citizens and does nothing to protect against those who have a history or seek to illegally obtain firearms for nefarious purposes. I would add, Mr. Speaker, and I know I'm not the only one in this chamber who can say this, my wife and daughters are home alone while I serve up here. And it brings me great comfort knowing that my wife has the legal ability to protect our home and my family while I'm away. And that personal protection can come from my father, her father-in-law, without having to perform a long and senseless background check or worry about identifying imminent danger of someone who would unlawfully enter our home. This legislation makes my wife and little girls less safe. Those who call Nevada home deserve better than a publicity stunt put forth by a red herring of protection. They deserve to truly be protected. Protected against those who seek to trample upon our Constitution or those who seek to promote a false sense of security while greatly weakening Nevada's security. Let me be very clear, I am not against background checks or any such requirements for the retail purchase of firearms, although I am always in favor of bipartisanship in an effort to do the right thing for Nevada. I urge my colleagues to cast a no vote this afternoon, not because I don't have compassion for those victims of violent crime. It would be impossible not to. I have every intention of working with and building relationships of trust with my colleagues across the aisle, and we should absolutely seek to promote legislation to stop these all too familiar tragedies. But we should seek to work together, and this legislation, especially in its process, did not accomplish that. Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful for the opportunity I've had to share my thoughts today.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And I also remind members that it violates our decorum to question the motives of members, such as publicity stunt. So let's talk about the merits of the measures that come before this body. Assemblyman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and colleagues of the Nevada Assembly, all of the guests who took time out of their busy schedules to be here today and watch us online, I rise before you in opposition of SB143 for a myriad of reasons. Reasons that should bother each and every one of us in this august chamber today. So many, in fact, that I don't believe I can address them all in the short amount of time available. So, Mr. Speaker, please allow me to just hit some highlights. First, I'd like to share all my deepest condolences to all victims of senseless killings, guns and otherwise. Please be aware that we are all in support of measures that would mitigate these tragedies. However, we all know this bill will not do anything to stop them. Instead, I believe this bill seems like Nevada following a political agenda instead of what Nevada usually does. We lead the way in so many things, and this bill doesn't seem to reach that. Mr. Speaker, we need to have sensible laws that are not so terribly flawed. The agenda I speak of is one clearly outlined by a spokesperson on a national level who said that background bills such as this particular one, on the record, she said, that the main point in background check bills is to start a nationwide gun registry, that these laws would not be enforceable without them. And given the history of the world, I have to believe that this is just a start. Once future leaders get bills like this and they know right where to go in order to get any guns they wish to confiscate. And in the past, this has never, not once, turned out well for the citizens of those countries. And why do I believe this? Because it's the only thing this bill actually accomplishes. Other than that, I believe the bill is so flawed that even when it was presented, the presenter was reduced to having some questions asked of him during the presentation, and the answers were only, how do we do it? This is how we do it in another state. This actual person was even told one of the members that asked a question to violate law and commit a straw transfer between her and a member of her family to get around an onerous requirement of this law on law-abiding citizens. If this law was in effect during last month's senseless and tragic killings right here in my own district and in Reno, perpetrated by a criminal who stole the gun and never would have went through a background check, I myself would have been tempted to break this law when an elderly neighbor asked to borrow one of my firearms in case the murderer on the loose came to our street. If that happens again after SB 143 takes effect, I would have to get her a background check to loan her that firearm. And then when she returns it, she would have to get